Star Wars 7x7, episode 2970. Today it's the second half of my conversation with Cavan Scott. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So here's the rundown on Cavan again. Cavan is a New York Times best-selling author whose work includes novels, television, comic books, and award-winning audio dramas. He's written for a large number of high-profile series, including Star Wars, Batman, Doctor Who, Assassin's Creed, Pacific Rim, Transformers, Back to the Future, Star Trek, Vikings, Adventure Time, and more. Amazing. And that's my editorializing. Here's the rest of it. His creator-owned series include the supernatural spy thriller Shadow Service from Vault Comics and the ward and urban fantasy medical drama that launched this June from Dark Horse Comics. Now, also, as I mentioned on yesterday's episode, this isn't necessarily timed to a release, right? When we have folks appear on the show, sometimes they are there because something of theirs in which they're involved, whether by, writing or by performing, has just come out, and that's what we're talking about primarily. That's not the case with this, so we're digging into Cavan's process as an incredibly prolific creator, and we're also talking about High Republic stuff as well, reflecting on Phase 1 and hinting at what's to come, and you'll get more of that in this second half of the conversation today. So let's get into it. Without further ado, here's the rest of my conversation with Cavan Scott.
So when you spoke of flexibility earlier, it does sound like, based on your response there's a lot of flexibility that's built into the overarching narrative of the High Republic that allows you and the rest of the writers and creators to focus on characters and have them develop in a very natural way that also can still work within whatever the idea is for the overarching narrative.
Yeah, it was, and that was part of the plan right from the beginning. So to borrow from another franchise that I've been involved in the past, there are fixed points in time in the High Republic. There are things that have to happen at certain points, big galactic events. And part of the thinking behind it was us thinking back to the original trilogy and thinking of, the Death Star blows up in the first film. Spoilers, sorry if you're not seen. And that has ramifications for loads of different people over the galaxy. And obviously, when we saw the first film, we have the ramifications for the people involved. In storytelling since, we've learned so many different stories. And in modern canon, we've had stories from both Imperial and Rebel sides of what that one event meant. And so we just kept thinking that, at various points. And again, I don't want to get too spoilery for people who haven't been reading the High Republic Phase 1, but the Republic Fair, which is the centerpiece of my novel, The Rising Storm, we knew that was going to be a big cataclysmic event for the galaxy. It was going to have ramifications for a lot of the storytelling. It was going to be it is the exciting instant, really, that sets off the High Republic in a lot of the cases. It sort of moves the story on. So that was baked in. That was baked in right from the beginning. There is a timeline when that had to happen there. Mm-hmm. What we didn't really set in stone, except for a few of the major characters, was how every character responded to that, or how, so it gave us chance in the writing to have the freedom to let the characters develop as they did. A point in that story would be Elza Mann for me. I knew Elza Mann was going to be involved in the Republic Fair. I didn't quite know where his story was going to go in it when I sat down to start planning that novel. So beforehand, I knew he was going to be a major player. I knew that him and Stellan were going to be the two main Jedi of the novel. I knew they were friends, and that was as much I knew about their parts in that adventure at that point when I was sitting going, right, I need to start planning this novel properly. And again, I sort of knew where Stellan would end up. I knew Stellan would end up being like the poster boy of the Jedi. How does that work with Elza? Well, that came out of the writing and the planning and the brainstorming on that particular novel, which then has had ramifications further on. And then again, Claudia, when she sat down to write the Fallen Star, and again, I give a bit of a spoiler warning, sorry, for anyone who's not read that book. One of the main characters does not make it out. Well, quite a few characters don't make it out of that book, but one of the main characters in the High Republic doesn't make it out of that book. We didn't know that was going to happen at that point. That at that point, we thought that character was continuing, and it became obvious in the plan of the story that actually something needed to change. And just like real life, when a character in your life is taken away from you, what difference does that make to your life? That's what we decided to do with that novel. And now planning beyond the end of phase one, when we are thick in the planning for phase three at the minute and sort of ramping up into writing it. The ripples from that event at the end of the Falling Star are leading to so much better ideas that we had in the first place. The storytelling, the character work, how characters are reacting, none of that would be there if we hadn't have given ourselves the freedom to say what happens in this book and how does it change the ongoing story. Again, we had to make sure the big event, I think everyone knows now, Falling Star, a certain space station falls out the stars. That was always going to happen. The ramifications of who went down with it was something we gave ourselves the luxury to be able to work with. And I think we're all pleased that it ended up the way it was. I know some fans aren't. Well, that's the way of storytelling. And I will stand here, hand on my heart, and say, hopefully you will realize when we get to phase three, the difference that has made for the characters, and that's the organic part of storytelling. That's the opportunity it provides us with.
And I'm certain that the reaction is more about emotional investment than anything else, in which case then you have absolutely done your job, and so have the rest of the writers in the whole initiative for that. And it strikes me how wonderful and surprising and beautiful it is, and of course it should work this way creatively, that and thinking about Elzar Mann in specific, as you were describing your approach to the Rising Storm, it sounds like you didn't necessarily have in mind from the beginning that he was going to have a particular kind of dark turn. And again, not to do too spoilery a discussion of it, but go ahead.
I mean, I'd say I knew one of the things that was baked into his character that he would brush up against the dark side. But again, we didn't want to, and again, we didn't know how. One of the notes was that he couldn't become Anakin 2.0, and we really kept looking at that. And going into it, I knew at some point he had to brush up against the dark side. Until I sat down and started to plot that novel, I didn't quite know how he would cope with it. And so when I was sitting down writing it, I still wasn't quite sure. I knew what I needed him to do for the plot. And that's when you get into the point where you're going, well, you don't want characters to do stuff because the plot's demanding it. And so I knew how he again, it's almost like a smaller version of what I was talking about. There were fixed points in the story that something had to happen, he had to do something, and this would be the outcome at the end. And so that's where I would leave him. How he reacted to that had to come through the writing. And as I hadn't written Elzar at that moment, I had to write myself into knowing who that character was. And it was, I think, when we get into the nitty gritty of it now, and again, sorry if this is spoilery to people, there is a moment where he does touch the dark side, and what we've seen in Star Wars before, and again, I had the back of my mind, don't write Anakin, don't write Anakin, don't write Anakin. Anakin would keep it secret. Anakin kept everything secret. I mean, that was the problem with Star Wars, people kept secrets. If you just talked to Obi-Wan, perhaps we wouldn't have had Darth Vader. And if the Order had just listened to people, perhaps we wouldn't have had Darth Vader. So again, knowing that I didn't want to go that route, suddenly became very obvious that he's got this brilliant friend there, and what do you do with a friend? You go and ask them for help. And so that was a real light bulb moment, and that changed his trajectory in a way, because it offered some hope, which is obviously what you need in Star Wars. I then had to think, well, if that's happening, that's when I get, I throw up the luminous signal and say we need to talk, because then I had to see what the ramifications of that moment would be later on in the line. When we made the decision of what we were doing in Claudia, and Claudia suggested what she was going to do in Fallen Star, and we all talked about that in so much detail. One of the questions was, we've set up this relationship between Elzar and Stellan. What does it do to Elzar? And so that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had that moment. I then had to go back, and at the minute when you read the Rising Storm, there's a prologue, which is Elzar starting to ask questions. That didn't exist in the first draft. It came from those moments when he asked Stellan. It was all about balancing that moment. So that's what we've tried to really bake into how we work, is that ability to trust each other as well, enough to turn around and say, look, we're thinking about this. Can I do it? What does that mean? And sometimes there is a very definite no, you can't do that, because that's going to have too many ramifications down the line. That's going to break things that we really need to happen. But 80% of the time, probably more, it's a case of going, oh, that's a bit annoying, but actually if we do this, that gives us something better. So yeah, that's been part of the way the High Republic, even long before it became the High Republic, the way the team was set up was to have that built into the way we were working.
Thank you so much for that additional insight. That's really amazing and awesome. You've kind of opened the door to a phase 3 thing, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that for our listeners and viewers, but I want to roundly and effectively shut the door on that, because I don't think we're necessarily allowed to get into that kind of talk. So I'm going to spin you back around to another process thing that I was hoping to ask you about, which is the fact that you shared that music is a big part of your writing process. It helps to set a mood for yourself as you write. And I'm wondering, is this something that's always been part of your writing process, or is it something that you came to over time, and how have you refined your use of music as part of your process over time?
I think originally it was a way of blocking out the world. So when I was a journalist, we worked in big offices and you played music to try and focus in a way. I've actually gone the other way as I now have worked, by myself largely for a better part, well, more than a decade now. That actually I usually need silence to write in, or the equivalent of silence. I quite often play like white noise or sort of various the noise of rain, which at the minute has been wonderful to work with. I don't know about over there. We've been living through a heat wave that Britain is not set up for, so I've had rain playing all the time, but just that, that sort of barrier to babble in the background or noise in the background. But it used to be music. Now it's just turned into a sort of white noise or ambient sound. What I use music for is to change gears. So it's to get myself in the mood for a scene, or if I'm doing that thing of jumping between projects. And as you say, I don't just write Star Wars, I write other things as well. So I almost give different projects theme tunes. So if and they're not necessarily a bit, with Star Wars, it is pretty simple, because you just play a bit of John Williams and you're in the right mood. Then you have to choose which type. But it's if I'm starting off on one of my own series, Dead Sea is a series that I'm writing at the minute, which is coming out later on in the year. And there is a Star Wars link, because Nick Brokenshire, the artist on Star Wars Adventures, who I work with, is the artist on this as well. That's a haunted ship, ghost ship kind of story, a sort of cross between Poseidon Adventure and Haunting of Hill House. So I play some Haunting of Hill House music to get myself in the mood to write that. And it is absolutely just a shorthand, and it's sort of something clicks in my brain and goes, all right, so you're not thinking about laser swords today, you're thinking about lost souls. And so and it depends, and it depends on the project. Tempest Runner, I can't remember the exact track, but there was a sort of instrumental metal piece that I used to sort of get into Lorna's head, which is a terrifying place. At the minute, I think everyone knows by now that phase 2 for me, for the comic, happens on Jeddah. So very coincidentally, and thank you so much, Mondo, they produced the big a big soundtrack album, which is all the music from Rogue One. So that's become the way that I get myself into the mood to write the comic book. So so it's not during writing. It's more a gear change, as I said. It can be if I get stuck and I need to think about a plot point or a character point, then that's when the music goes on. But the actual writing itself is usually in pretty much silence.
Got it. And I will ask you one last sort of High Republic question, if I may, which is, do you have an idea of what Jaxxon's ancestors are doing during the time of the High Republic?
Absolutely.
And I have a feeling by your one-word answer, that is as far as we're going to go with it.
Yep, that's right.
Well, Cavan Scott, thank you so much for your incredible generosity with your time and your insights. For anybody who wants to continue finding out what you are up to, whether it's Star Wars related or anything else you're working on, how should people continue to follow you on your journey?
My website is a good place to start, which is cavanscott.com. And then on Twitter, where I spend far too much time, I am at Cavan Scott. And yeah, and that gives you the idea of everything I'm doing for Star Wars that I can talk about. My other projects like Dead Seas and what else have I got in a minute? The Ward, which is basically an ER with monsters. Most of my stuff is this with monsters, because I worked out a long time ago that every story is better with a monster in it. And obviously work I'm doing for DC Comics, I'm writing Titans and Black Adam and things at the minute. So that's all to be found at those places.
Excellent. And I will link to them at the blog post for the show's episode at sw7x7.com and also in the show notes as well. Cavan Scott, thank you again for joining me on Star Wars 7x7. It's such a pleasure to be talking with you again, and at length as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and you know, we've all appreciated the support you've given us on your podcast. And while I can't say I listen to it every day, you know, your voice does pop up in my house quite a lot every week. So you know, I do binge the show quite regularly.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. You know, I think that's what the joy of what we do now. I started off writing fiction through things like the old-fashioned fanzines, literally photocopied fanzines went through the post. I think what we've got now in, you know, podcasts and YouTube channels and all those kind of things, they're the modern versions of fanzines that we all grew up with. But I think the great thing about it now is the interaction and the fact that we're all in the same sandpit. And I think that has challenges, but also I think the benefits outweigh them all. So yeah, thank you so much for what you do. It really is appreciated.
And there you go. That was my conversation with Cavan Scott, who's the author of so many incredible works across so many different franchises. It's crazy, but probably most significantly, and for which he's most well known in the Star Wars world right now, his work on the High Republic. And that is going to do it for this episode of the show. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.